I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 88. And this week it's Terri's turn to be the one sharing. What have you got for us today, Terri?
Well, Daisy, I think this episode was pretty interesting to me. Almost every topic in it probably could be its own episode, so we probably won't take many deep dives in any of these, but lots of interesting things and some that touch on former topics that we've talked about. This is from an episode of the Mindvalley podcast with Vishen Lakhiani.
Oh, we haven't had a Mindvalley episode for a while.
Yeah. It's called 5 Steps to Transform Stress for Deep and Restorative Sleep with Charlie Morley.
Sounds helpful.
Yeah. Charlie Morley, I'd never heard of him, but he did one of the quests for Mindvalley, and he teaches lucid dreaming.
Oh, interesting.
And shadow integration. And if you go through his history, he's got tons of years of experience in studying Buddhism, mindfulness, deep sleep. He's written several books, goes on month-long inner retreats and things. So very much into the woo, but also into the science of the woo.
Good combination.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed, anytime a podcast episode is going to talk about the 5 things, the 5 pillars, 6 easy steps, they do a lot of in-depth on the first few, and then by the end, they're just rushing through the end.
Right.
So I think this one follows with that. But mostly just talking about using our sleep and our dreams for help with stress management, but also stress management to help with sleep. So I'm just going to dive into his 5 pillars. And pillar number 1 is about the power of knowledge of how we sleep. And I learned a new vocabulary word while listening to this. He kept saying this word, and I happened to listen to my podcast on at least 1.5 speed. And he also has an accent. So I had to go back and listen to it like 5 times, and I still couldn't figure it out. So halfway through the podcast, I had to stop and look up the word and try and spell it different ways. But the word is hypnagogic. And it is that state of almost half sleep when you're just falling asleep and you kind of feel out of it. You're not quite awake, but you're not quite asleep yet. And what happens during that time is our brain shifts from being active in the left side of our brain, which is involved in the waking state, shifts to the right hemisphere of sleep and dream. And interestingly, in this, there's something called the egocentric preference system. And the egocentric preference system filters thoughts for us during the day. So let's say you have a biased thought. Your brain sifts it out, filters it out, because that's not symbiotic with how you identify yourself. Saying that or thinking that wouldn't fit for you. So it just kind of filters it so that you don't go there. Well, at night when we're in this, or when we're going to sleep and we're in this hypnagogic state, that system is turned off. And that is why we dream and think about things that we don't think about in the waking state. And he does a lot of talking about dreams, but I just thought that was pretty interesting. And he talked about the idea that when we have upsetting thoughts or that kind of jarring, you wake up quickly because you feel like you're falling off a cliff or something, that we can help mitigate the effect of that by remembering that fear and fascination can't exist at the same time in our brain. And so if we're having a fear response, if we can activate the fascination response and think, wow, that's interesting. I was falling asleep and imagined falling off a cliff. I wonder what that's telling me. If we can go into the fascination, we get out of the fear place.
That's interesting.
So this is one thing he talks about, that it's important about our dreams. And even just knowing that our brain does this can be helpful to us. The next pillar is rest and relaxation. And he talked about the idea that we generally don't get enough relaxation. And many of us, and I know there are many books now that focus on this, focus on sleep and sleep hygiene and setting yourself up for good sleep like an hour before you sleep. And he talked about the fact that good sleep is actually built during the day. And we can affect how we sleep at night by what we're doing during the day. And even that period of time, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before bed, he talked about kind of a sleep bridge, that there are things that we can do to calm ourselves, slow ourselves down to be ready for sleep rather than racing around, doing a lot of things, and then trying to lay down and go to sleep. Doesn't work very well. And in this, he talked about the fact that we have something called the parasympathetic drive. And just in case this is a newer phrase for people, the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite of the sympathetic. And sympathetic is the activated state, and the parasympathetic is the calm state. And so he talked about this parasympathetic drive as like an electric car battery, which I think is a good analogy for these times, that if you want to be able to run that car, you need to charge the battery. So if you want to be in a restful state at night to go to sleep, you have to charge the parasympathetic system during the day. You need periods of activation of the parasympathetic system during the day in order to be able to be restful and get good sleep at night. Part of this, he talked about something called Nsdr, and that stands for No Sleep, Deep Rest. And interestingly, this comes from one of our favorites, Andrew Huberman, came up with this concept.
Oh, really?
And it is where we're getting deeper rest, but we're not sleeping. So we're more in that hypnagogic state. And what it does is it activates our alpha and theta brain waves. So it's the rest state. And that we can do this during the day. So one example of he talked about that you could use for this is Nidra yoga meditation. It's not mindfulness meditation where you're trying to be present. It's actually that kind of hypnotic yoga where you're actually kind of marrying sleep and meditation. You're not asleep yet, but you're not fully present either. So doing this throughout the day can be really helpful, giving our brain time to be in this deep rest state while not sleeping. If you could do it more than once a day, that would be great for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And during this time, Vishen asked, what about napping? Is this like napping? And so Charlie, the guest, talked about napping, and he said napping is very healthy, and he gave some parameters for it, but he said, but it is different than the no sleep deep rest state, the Nsdr. But he said that an ideal nap is less than 90 minutes. And I know you and I have talked, you've done some presentations, and I've done some presentations on sleep from different people and talking about kind of a 90-minute cycle. Yeah. So less than 90 minutes, and that you wake up at least 6 hours before your planned bedtime. Because, and I did not take note of what this was called, but there is something that we kind of gather a certain amount of something that helps us fall asleep, and it takes about 5 or 6 hours to kind of recharge that. And so this is why you don't want to nap a couple hours before bed.
Oh, right. So you would drain that, whatever it is, with a nap. Makes sense. Yeah.
And so then something interesting that he shared about this is then they started talking about just getting poor sleep. Like, what if you don't get enough sleep, insufficient sleep, or just crappy sleep? And he talked about the idea that a 1-hour nap, in studies where they studied people's cognitive abilities. So let's say they had someone sleep for 8 hours, tested their cognitive abilities, and then had them sleep only for 4 hours and tested their cognitive abilities. They were greatly reduced. But if they took a 1-hour nap, that will return the cognitive level to the same as the 8 hours of sleep. So it has that much ability to restore at least your cognitive functioning.
That's impressive. That sounds it really packs a massive punch. You're talking, it packing the equivalent of several hours of sleep in much less time. This sounds like a hack that I'm sure people have tried out. But you've got to do it this 6 hours. So presumably the timing is crucial.
Right. And you have to have an hour of your day that you can have a nap, which if you're, didn't sleep last night because you have a really busy day, chances of you having an hour-long nap 6 hours before bed might be a little slim. But also, he doesn't say necessarily that overall all of the sleep effects are replaced, but at least on this test of cognitive abilities, restored with an hour-long nap.
Interesting.
So then Vishen asked him, he's like, now wait a minute, what if I wake up 2 hours early? Should I go ahead and get up and then plan to have a nap later, or is it better for me to lie there and try to go back to sleep? And Charlie Morley really focused on it is never helpful to lie there for very long trying to sleep. And he referred to someone who said basically that is the definition of insomnia, trying to go to sleep, that it should just happen naturally. And if it doesn't, he does recommend get up, and you could do something for the Nsdr, a half hour of Nidra yoga meditation, something to get that state activated. Later, you could do an hour nap, and you could be cognitively at least functioning as well as if you had slept all night. So not fighting, lying in bed and fighting, trying to get to sleep. I found this part fascinating, that a lot of people say, yeah, but when I don't sleep well, I don't think as well, I'm irritated. Very interesting. After a night of insufficient sleep, the amygdala, that part of our brain that is the fight or flight activation point, is 60% more reactive than usual. So insufficient sleep means we are more prone to perceive annoyances. We are more likely to be in a kind of hyper state of fight and flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So if we don't get good sleep, our amygdala is more reactive the next day. We're activating the sympathetic nervous system more, not recharging the parasympathetic. So this is how it kind of cascades, and it becomes night after night of not getting good sleep and feeling crappy. So the rest and relaxation pillar, I think, is a really important one. The next pillar, pillar 3, is about breath work. And I know you've done some episodes about breath. And he would just talk about some things that I thought were pretty interesting. One is the idea that the quickest way to change your state is through breath. If you breathe quickly, that is the quickest way to feel panic, because your brain perceives what's going on with the lungs. It's a threat feeling, and so it creates panic.
Particularly if you did what you just did and you're fast breathing through your mouth. Yeah.
Yep. And then slower breath with an audible sigh, like, if you did that for a couple minutes, you automatically would be in a more relaxed state because your brain is taking cues from what's going on with the lungs. So this I thought was fascinating. The optimal human breath rate, which I'm shocked that they measure these things and know these things, but the optimal rate is about 5 breaths per minute.
Wow, is that all?
So it's kind of a slow inhale and a slow exhale. And when this happens, when we're doing this 5 breaths per minute, our electrical rhythm of our heart and our lungs becomes synchronized, and they call this coherent breathing. And HRV, our heart rate variability, becomes optimized after only a few minutes of this. So this slowing down of the breath, even if you can't do it all day, even doing it several times for several minutes each day can make a big impact. Now, in some research, when they were looking at biomarkers, one researcher looking at this optimal human breath rate said that with this optimal rate, everything that's measurable improves. So I just mentioned, heart rate variability, pulse, probably your pulse ox, your glucose levels, everything that they can measure improves with this. So he dug in a little bit, and he came up with a little different information than Vishen, because while they were talking, Vishen Googled it. Mm-hmm. But he said that the average person nowadays breathes about 15 to 20 breaths per minute, with an average of 17. Vishen came up with a little bit lower number, 12 to 16. But in 1939, the average human breath rate was 4.9.
Wow.
So we have more than tripled it since then. Mm. And as late as 1980, it was 7.8. So we've doubled it since 1980. And he kind of questions, if we have doubled this at the same time that we have doubled cardiovascular, diabetes, all of these health concerns, isn't there maybe a correlation here? Mm. So we talked about the fact that anytime we breathe 10 breaths per minute or more, we are in a fight or flight pattern. And this means our sympathetic nervous system is activated. So if we average, based on both of their research, if we average 15 beats per minute, it means that most of us are in fight or flight much of the time. And again, this is activating our sympathetic nervous system. So it's not a surprise then that we don't rest well and have a difficult time sleeping. And he described it, it's like holding the handbrake on your car while you're driving. Like you're pushing on the gas to do this, but you're also holding it back. Being in this state, in the fight or flight state, means that we release more cortisol. Cortisol leads to buildup in plaque acids, so we're getting more risk for cardiovascular disease. And of course, all of this interferes with sleep. So working on slowing down our breath, even if we, like I said, if we can't do it all day long, to even take periods of time when we do it. And then he also talked about nose breathing, just as you said, and said that when you breathe through your nose, you bring in more oxygen because nitric oxide expands the blood vessels. So you're able to get more oxygen in. And when you breathe through your mouth, you do take in more air. And I think you talked about this in an episode where, like, after you work out, the temptation is to breathe through the mouth because you feel like you need to get more air. But that actually gives us less oxygen. And so again, just highlighting what you had already shared about the importance of nose breathing. Also, breathing through the mouth while you sleep especially causes growth of bacteria, has similar effects of drinking soda. So a lot of dentists are very aware of the dangers of mouth breathing at night.
Yes, that surprised me a lot. That was something that James Nestor highlighted. Mm-hmm. It's not something really that you'd think about, is it? That nasal breathing and a huge increase in cavities, or rather mouth breathing and a huge increase in cavities would go hand in hand.
And he also then mentioned mouth taping as a strategy. Again, this does not mean a big piece of duct tape across your mouth, but a little strip of surgical tape that can easily be moved with your mouth moving. But he said that when he uses mouth taping, he actually needs less sleep because it naturally slows down your breath, which improves everything, and you're getting more oxygen, so you're getting more restorative sleep. So lots of reasons why that would be good. Pillar 4 and Pillar 5 I don't have much to say about, but Pillar 4 and Pillar 5 are on the same topic, and that is about nightmares. Well, nightmares and dreaming. So Pillar 4 is about transforming nightmares and recognizing that nightmares are not bad things, even though they're really uncomfortable. That basically nightmares are just drawing attention to unresolved psychological needs or experiences, and that actually nightmares are a sign of a healing mind. We need them to heal, and some researchers even describe them as evolutionary tools of development. They help us grow and develop. And in that, he talked about the evolutionary threat theory, that if we only dream about past things that happen, past traumas, we can work on resolving them. But it's also important that we work on future events. And you and I have talked about this in other ways, but it's kind of like a mental rehearsal that we can integrate new survival strategies through nightmares as well, which will help prepare us. And he used an example of a cave person, if they were dreaming nightmares about an attack from an animal, and the one who only dreamt about that wouldn't develop as much as the one who also was dreaming about going out in a field and meeting a new animal or a new beast or something, that was helping for survival development as well. And talked about the idea that nightmares actually may be a prerequisite to healing. In one study that he talked about, they looked at people who have depression and that it was pretty much caused by a single effect trauma, a death, breakup of a relationship, or a trauma, like a physical trauma or something. Those who dreamt about the event itself stopped feeling depressed more quickly than those who dreamt about other things. So sometimes I think we want to encourage people, they don't have to dream about the event, it's okay. And actually this research shows that possibly dreaming about the trauma itself actually helps decrease the depressive response more quickly than just the idea of dreaming. And then pillar 5, I really have very little about this one, partly because it's a bigger topic that I don't know a lot about, but it's about lucid dreaming, which is his big topic and what he teaches. He talked about the importance of this state of recognizing I'm dreaming, because that can help us integrate the psychological pieces of the dream or the nightmare and, come to some integration with it. And he talked about for people like with PTSD, just talking about dreaming more is not going to be helpful, because during their dreams, they're going to have so much noradrenaline going that they're going to not be able to integrate the information, that it's just going to be re-traumatizing, which I thought was really interesting. So he talked about lucid dreaming that he teaches, and he did a study, and I am not remembering the correct word right now, but it's something you and I talked about in a very early episode. It's where this one institute kind of looks at the field of studying effects of treatments like placebo effect, nocebo effect, things like that. So by not giving a medical treatment, not giving a drug or something, what effect do people have from the treatment? And in this, they brought in people with PTSD and taught them lucid dreaming. They measured the results after a week and then 3 weeks later. And 1 week after the training, by the end of the week of training, like 75% of the participants had had a lucid dream, which is a good step for folks with PTSD. And by that point, had decreased their symptoms so much that they no longer met the criteria for PTSD.
Wow.
And then after 3 weeks, even people who had not had a lucid dream experienced a significant reduction in symptoms. So just knowing about this process helped change it for them. So again.
And quickly too.
Yeah. I don't know as much about this pillar. Maybe I need to take that quest in Mindvalley, but that one is lucid dreaming. So really, I just wanted to share all of these tidbits today of things that we can do to build up that parasympathetic drive, using naps strategically, working on getting in that no sleep deep rest, the Nsdr, the nose breathing, not mouth breathing as much as possible, slowing down the breath rate, I think is huge. And then just recognizing that, again, fascination and fear can't exist in the brain at the same time. And so the more we can switch over to connecting to an experience as fascination rather than threatening, that we change our state. So lots of stuff there.
Yes, I'm really interested to know what kind of things, apart from that type of yoga that you mentioned, which of course I'm going to Google as soon as we finish, but what things classify as this Nsdr. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about maybe things like Tai Chi might come into that. It sounds like you're putting yourself into a relaxed state but that you mentioned that is not like a mindfulness state, but you're still very much conscious but distracted from your surroundings. But so I'm wondering, what the classification is there.
He talked about like lying down meditation. And so often I struggle with these because as soon as I lay down to do a guided meditation, I fall asleep. But it's that lying down, being in that in-between state.
Oh, right. Okay. So you've got to get as close as possible to this. What was it called? Hypnagogic?
Hypnagogic.
Yeah. And I had a question about that. You mentioned it's the state you get into as you're falling asleep. Is it also the state that you're in as you're waking up? Or is that different?
I think that's
I know I often
state.
feel, because I kind of feel what you're talking about more in that sort of waking up phase rather than the going to sleep phase.
I think in the waking place, we're in a hyper aware, like we're clearer. Things can come to us. Creative things can come to you. Things you need to remember can come to you. So you're in a very clear state then, rather than the fugue-like state of the hypnagogic state.
Interesting. I was wondering what you were going to say about nightmares. And so I was very interested in that section, and I'd like to go and listen to more what they have to say about it, because something I've noticed, and you went on to talking about, especially when it relates to depression and maybe what was one of the things that caused that depression. One of the big things that impacts me in that way is when I have a dream about somebody I had a disastrous relationship with. I'm not necessarily pinning, and I'm not actually pinning all my depression on that, but it was definitely one of those pivotal moments. It was definitely a pivotal relationship, the way he made me feel, the manipulation, things like that. But my point is that when I have a dream about him, and it's often in that, I guess that's when you remember dreams, is often when you're having them in that period when you're starting to wake up. But it kind of always, never mind how much I try to compensate, always kind of ruins that day. It really sets me up for a day of just feeling off. And so I was wondering when you started talking about that, if there was any way of changing that in that sort of like fear and fascination vein that you were talking about. Wondering if there's any way, any kind of workaround other than just don't get me wrong, I don't sort of have to write the day off, but I feel off and I'm certainly not in a good mood. And yes, it's not a good day after I've had one of those dreams, which fortunately are few and far between these days.
This probably sounds like it's minimizing it, but I think this is the best I can come up with in response to that right now, is recognizing I know why I had that dream. My brain is wanting to reconcile this relationship, wanting me to feel better about it. I don't have to repair the relationship, but wanting me to feel better, let it go, feel at peace with it. So that's why I dreamt this, because I think otherwise there's this kind of niggling response of like, why did I have to think about that? And, oh God, now I remember all the crappy things they did, versus, oh, my brain did this to help me make some peace with it. I'm just working through, I'm ironing it out. Then we don't have to hold on to it all day in that kind of questioning negative place.
Yes, it's always kind of weird, especially something that's so far in the past. It almost, the thing that goes through my mind is wondering if it's sort of like using it, like so often the case with dreams, isn't it? Sort of using it as a metaphor for sorting out something else. It's like the image that you recognize, whereas it's actually trying to work something else out. I don't know. I'm sure we could go off on trying to figure out dreams. That's a whole nother episode, isn't it?
Or just the current thing is requiring a similar message, and it's just making you rehash that to resolve that message, that learning.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like a very interesting episode. I think I'm going to go off and listen to him. You mentioned he had an accent. Where's he from?
I don't know. I had it sped up. It could have been British. Once you speed it up, it's kind of hard to tell. You'll recognize as soon as you start. The other thing is, I think you'll enjoy it, Daisy, just because there's so many topics in there that we've touched on in other ways. Brings up Andrew Huberman, someone that we enjoy. I think you'll really enjoy it. And he's kind of funny. Doesn't hold back from swearing and things when he's referring to a bad night's sleep and what you want to say to people the next day and things. So it's an enjoyable
great.
episode.
Yeah, you've ticked loads of my boxes there.
That's right. Well, I hope everyone can enjoy integrating some of the things we've talked about. And if you want to go for more, you could go back and maybe read one of Charlie Morley's books or go to his site and get some of his actual meditations and things that you could use for the Nsdr.
Brilliant.
Yes.
I shall be listening to that episode later. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope you have very good sleep and a very fabulous week.
Take good care, everybody. Bye-bye.